Thank you, Dan, for joining us. Everybody on the call, for those of you, if you've not done this before, please stay muted. Dan's going to do a presentation. If you have any questions, enter them into the chat. I'll try to integrate that into the conversation, or we'll hold off to the end. We'll do some Q&A. But just so there's no distractions, if everybody could just stay muted, that'd be wonderful. And so let's go ahead and get into it. Dan, thanks for being here. Introduce yourself and what's your story? How did you get into rum and deciding to be an independent bottler? You're on mute.
There you go. I figured I'd do it at least once, probably twice before the night's over. Mike, thanks a ton for reaching out to me and inviting me to participate and present to the group. I'm really excited to do so, and very excited to share the story behind Grandeur, what we're doing, how it originated, and why it's special to me. And to your point, I certainly welcome all kinds of questions. So, if you guys, Mike, if you want to moderate that, that's fine. But feel free to interrupt and stop the presentation. We can talk. We can divert. So pretty much a free-form evening. I assume everyone has some samples. Is that correct?
Yeah,
okay.
We distributed about 30 samples. A couple went to Houston. I think 5 went to Dallas, and the rest are here in Austin.
Okay, wonderful. So, excuse me, assuming you haven't already partaken in those, and if you have, that's okay. But I'll be, I guess, recommending as we go what to try, and we'll talk about the expression itself. Excuse me. Actually, I returned. I was in Panama last week, and I returned with a cold. Thank goodness, I don't think it was the COVID type, but nonetheless, a little bit of congestion, and I'm probably 95% better. But so I apologize for any coughing. Okay, I'm going to then jump into this screen, and okay, let me do. All right, can you see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So we will. I guess Mike, to your point, I guess the best place to start this presentation on Grandeur is how it began. And my story, for those who haven't heard it before, you may have, but it may be a very similar story to some of you out there, with the exception of growing up in Kentucky. I grew up in Kentucky, and of course, growing up in Kentucky, I instantly grew a love for bourbon and rye whiskey, and to me, that was the center of the world. Rum, I think for still many folks in America out there, is considered just to be really a cheap cocktail mixer, and that's it. So I think for me, growing up, that was certainly my view of rum. It was pretty narrow, pretty limited, and I think again, for many people out in the U.S., that holds true today. So it was a number of years ago that I was handed a bottle of some aged rum, and I poured it neat, which I had never done before with rum, and I tasted it, and it completely blew me away. It was not at all what I was expecting. There was a lot of flavor, there was a lot of warmth, and it surprised me, quite honestly. And I think that opened this door up to, wait a minute, this is rum. And that door opened, and I jumped in and started really going down the path of discovering rum beyond what I knew, which again was very limited. And that put me on a journey of really appreciating not just rum itself, but really how diverse rum is. I think with me growing up, with bourbon and rye, I mean, yes, there's a lot of variations in those, but when you talk about rum, then the whole world just multiplies. It's a tenfold or even 100-fold in terms of the different styles of rums out there, and from the different countries and how it's produced. And so that for me was even more intriguing, more exciting. And I've come to the realization that I think everyone who partakes in alcohol will find something in rum to enjoy, whatever it may be. And I don't think you can say that about really many other spirits in the world. So I was very much captivated by this whole rum, and I got to the point where I knew I wanted to do something in the spirits industry. So growing up in Kentucky, of course, there's a number of big spirits companies based out of Louisville, and that's where I grew up. So I know people in the industry. I grew up around it, but I was never directly involved in it. And so I was essentially an outsider looking in, but it's something I wanted to be part of. And if I were a betting person, I would have bet it would have been bourbon, but here I am, it's rum. I decided to go down the rum path, not just for enjoyment, but get into it to develop a brand. So as Mike said, I am technically an independent bottler or a non-distilling producer, which is also a term out there which is not used a lot. But what makes me different from other independent bottlers is I'm really closely associated with just one distillery, one country, but one distillery. And so we can get into why that is versus sourcing from multiple countries and distilleries. But for me, I wanted to work with a distillery that I could evolve, innovate, and grow with. And so that really took me down a path. But before we go further, I think this is a good time to do our first tasting. And what I'd like to suggest is the 12-year-old, which is really what I have. I just poured myself a glass as well. The 12-year-old is interesting, first and foremost, by its color. You'll notice how light it is. That is from the fact that, of course, in the rum world, unlike bourbon, you can reuse barrels over and over and over. There is no limitation as to how many times you can use that barrel. So this 12-year-old is a blend of barrels that have aged a minimum of 12 years, but in barrels that we've already used between 4 and 5 times on average. And so if you can imagine, and I'm sure many of you already know this, so I apologize for maybe telling you something you already know. But for those that don't, every time you put a spirit or alcohol in a barrel, that alcohol is going to extract from that barrel, not just color, but the flavor profile and nuances the barrel has to offer. So it really begins to evolve and make that spirit, not only in terms of color, but aroma and flavors. So if you use it again the second time or the third time, you're just continuing to extract more from that barrel. But after a while, the barrel has less to give. And that is what the 12-year-old is. That barrel is almost neutral, meaning that it's going to have very subtle oak influence. It's going to give off very little color. And so the color for me, is it's a beautiful, natural, very light gold, and it represents really what Grander's about. It's the authenticity and the transparency that we want to bring to the market in terms of our rum. So I start off with this rum because to me it's also the most I guess elegant, if I could use one word to describe it. It's still bottled at 90 proof, so it provides a little bit of a kick going down. But I think the the judging notes, at least from my opinion, they do a fairly decent job. If you look down here, the Ultimate Spirits folks did a little write-up, and I think they do a fairly decent job of capturing what I would consider the essence of the 12-year-old. So to me, it's a lot going on. This one is very much representation of our grander rum from Panama, which is it's a molasses-based, calm distilled rum, but obviously without the added sugar or coloring that you might get with some other Spanish rums. So for me, I like to enjoy it neat, and it's one that I think you have to spend time with it to really allow it to open up its expression and to get to know it. It's a very warming sensation, a subtle sweetness, very easy to enjoy as well. So enough of the 12-year-old, and I'll continue talking about my story of grandeur. So
hey, just real quick, Dan, can I just interrupt real quick? Robbie had a good question. He's asking if those used barrels at their fourth or fifth fill, are you recharging or reconditioning those at all, or is it just the raw barrel?
So great question. It's the raw barrel. So one thing we don't have in Panama is a cooperage or anything. So the barrels, when they get down there, they are as they are. So if there's any repairs needed, unfortunately, we're not going to do anything, and we don't have the ability to rechar them or do anything with them. So we may have to reswell them depending on how long they've sat in the warehouse, but other than that, nothing else is happening with the barrel.
And is this intended to be a continuous release, or are you going to continue to batch rums that are at least 12 years old and keep a continuous release of 12-year grander? Yeah,
so grander 12-year-old has been on the market now for a number of years. So right now, in the foreseeable future, it is a release we continue. We do actually, the bottle I have, I don't know if you can see it or not, but on the back of the neck label, we actually put a batch number on there. So, and I'll talk about why we do that. But for the 8-year-old and 12-year-old, we do put batch numbers on there with each bottling. And but yes, the foreseeable future, it is our intent to continue. But with that said, though, I like to continue to evolve, innovate. So who knows what the future brings in my stand-up of products. But for today, 8 and 12 and Trophy are the core releases that we continue to put out.
Thank you.
So great questions. Thank you. So when I decided to jump in and to do this, before this picture, I actually went through a whole process of deciding, do I want to do a micro distillery and do my own? I live in Florida now, or do I want to focus on creating a relationship with a distillery and create a brand from scratch in collaboration with the distillery? And I actually went back to Kentucky to take a distilling course, and just to continue my education, but also to help me decide which path I wanted to take, because they're very different paths. I mean, they certainly share a lot of common threads, but they are very different. And I decided after that course, as much as I would love to have my own stills and production floor, for me, that would just be absolutely incredible. I decided that acquiring the knowledge to do that and to create something really wonderful, it takes vast experience and knowledge and know-how, and certainly that I would have to bring on board to work with me, or I can go to an existing distillery, tap into that knowledge and create something from scratch in collaboration that I could grow and evolve and innovate. And so that's what I decided to do. And so at that point, the next question is, you know, who do I seek out to do this with? And so I actually talked to a number of distilleries, tasted a lot of samples from a lot of distilleries, and I ended up flying into this city, which is Panama City. And that's where I met two gentlemen there, and we sat down. We talked about the production process, the operations, the philosophy behind their approach, and also my desire, what I wanted to do with rum, which for them was a little different, and what innovative things I wanted to bring to the table that they had not done as well. And at the end of the meeting, I think we both realized that this would be good for both of us. And so I picked Las Cabras Distillery in Panama. I show this picture one reason. So typically when I do, I go to Panama 4 times a year, and I fly into the city of Panama, which is what you see right here. But this picture to me is really, it's a nice picture because this is Panama City, obviously. This is the Pacific side, and through here is the entrance to the Panama Canal as well. Right here, if you can you see my mouse cursor? Okay, great. So right here is Casco Viejo, and that is the old town. But that actually was built. The original town of Panama actually is up here in this part of behind the clouds in this area. Actually, it's probably more like around here. And does anybody know what happened to the original settlement of Panama?
Anybody knows?
So it kind of a funny trick question, but actually a guy by the name of Captain Morgan came in and burnt it. He ransacked it. So so he went in there and ransacked Panama City, burnt it down, and so the inhabitants rebuilt down here, which is really a beautiful old town. So this is now the modern town of Panama. So anyhow, for what it's worth, it's a fun place to go if you haven't been. I would highly recommend it. Very safe and quite enjoyable. Really good food. So not a great place though to find rums. If you're going there to do a lot of rums hunting for a lot of different rum brands, you're not going to find them there, oddly enough.
How many distilleries are there in Panama right now?
So to my knowledge, there are 4. But I wouldn't quote me on that because I don't know if I have the exact, I can't say I have the exact, but you have the biggest one is Ron Abuelo rum, which I'm sure you've heard of. That's the big one. Then by size, you probably have Las Cabras Distillery. And then you have 2 smaller ones, Ron Tartavia, I think I think that's the name of it. And then there's a small one that is really small. It's primarily he's been a beer brewery, and I think he started distilling rum as well. So I threw him in there. There might be one more as well, a small one, but that's to my knowledge all that I know.
Is Las Cabras releasing rum under their own label or own brand? Or are they mostly just selling bulk?
I would say the majority of their business is to bulk, but they do have a rum brand called Origins, which is by Don Pancho, who is the master blender. So I don't know if it's in Texas or not, but Origins is the brand. All right. Let's see here. Okay. Speaking of people, so when I went down to Panama, Don Pancho is the older gentleman on the right side of the photo. He is now, I think, roughly 83, and then to the opposite of him is Carlos Esquivel, who is his business partner. So these two gentlemen are who I primarily work with when I go to Panama. For those who do not know Don Pancho, which is his nickname, Francisco Fernandez, he is Cuban born, and he actually learned his rum making ways in Cuba. And he did work for a Havana club, and he obviously left, and he went to Panama, became the master blender for Ron Abuelo, and then he left to join up with Carlos to start Las Cabras Distillery, which they did a number of years ago. So, Panama. So, talk about Panama, and we'll kind of show you where everything is going on. So, Panama is situated quite strangely. So this is obviously the Pacific side, and then you have the Atlantic side. This is Colombia and Costa Rica. So, of course, we have Panama City here. This is the canal running through here. So, in the, I guess you would say north western part of the state down here. So you go around this horseshoe a little bit, and this is the Herrera province, and this is where the distillery is located, as well as the sugarcane. So all of the sugarcane used for the rum at the distillery is grown here in this province, and the majority of it actually is the majority of the cane used is owned by the distillery itself as well. If they ever have a need for more cane that they have, then they'll buy locally from farmers. So there's just tons of sugarcane fields in this area. So this is where the sugarcane fields are, the processing plant for converting it to molasses, as well as the distillery and the aging warehouses on top of that. And then my bottling facility is up here just outside Panama City in San Miguelito. And that is where we bottle. It's actually, it's best for me because as soon as we bottle, we load everything up in a container, which then takes a trip up the canal. And if it's going over to the US, usually up to New York for me. Probably one of the most odd thing, I can't ever get over this, but when I'm in Panama City and you're looking out on the water, and keep in mind, this is the Pacific, but if you ever look on a map, the way Panama is oriented and the way it's against, north, south, and east and west, the sun rises over this portion, the Pacific. So it looks like the sun is rising over the Pacific. The way it's oriented and the way this horseshoe is. So it's really bizarre. So if you're, the first time you go to Panama, if you're not used to that, you see this, it really makes no sense why the sun could rise over or up on the Pacific. It's really bizarre. But once you look at a map, you'll figure it out. But it's at least entertaining at first when you don't understand. And here's just a couple photos, which I'll get into. The one on the top right is in Tom Pancho's office, sampling rums, and we have some distillery picks and bottling as well. Okay, so not to rush you, so by all means take your own time, but if you're ready for tasting number 2, I'd like to suggest the trophy release. So
real quick, somebody had asked earlier, and I was going to wait till we got to the next expression. for the 12-year, you mentioned there was like fourth and fifth use casks. Is that for all expressions across the board, or is that just on the 12-year?
Just the 12-year.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So the interesting thing about in rum, a couple of things. One, the barrel type you use, I mean, there's no requirements on what barrel type you use for aging. So we use primarily ex-bourbon. All of our barrels come from the well-known distilleries in Kentucky. But we don't have just one distillery supplying us with barrels. So if you walk through the warehouse, you'll actually see barrels from Brown-Forman, Jim Beam, Heaven Hill, Buffalo Trace. So you may get barrels that had different types of mash bills or even different char levels. And of course, then through aging, you have rum in barrels that have been used the first time or second time or the fourth time or fifth time. So even though the distillate is the same going into the barrel out of the gate, it all takes on a very different life based on that barrel. But our products, we use different types depending on what we're trying to do. That's a really good question. So the trophy release is a small batch of rums that I actually personally select to go into them. So the idea is I will select based on my tastings I do at the warehouse and during my trips to Panama, and I'll set aside really interesting rums that just grab my attention. So I'm looking for rums between 8 and 15 years of age, and once I identify what goes into that batch, we blend them together. We'll proof them down, typically in the low 50s, between 50 and 54% is, I guess, on average. And so the idea is that each release will be different from the last release. So what I want to do is really showcase some interesting rums that are coming out of the warehouse and put them together in these small batches and bring them to market. Even though each release will be different, you will certainly understand it's grander. You'll understand it shares the same DNA, but it will be different just based on what types of rums I'm selecting to go in. So you can see over the first two releases, and you actually have the second release, I believe 20B08, which is actually a blend of some 8, 13, and 15-year-old. So it's a this one's a lot of fun for me, and of course it's a lot of pressure as well. Working with the distillery to select and come up with a really intriguing blend to bottle and bring to market.
When it says you're using Speyside and toasted, so Speyside Scotch, what is the toasted? Is that just toasted barrels, or?
Yeah, so that's in this case it's actually a used barrel. It's a barrel finish. So the Speyside and toasted are barrel finishes. So we took a 12-year-old rum, and in that case I sat just over a year. One is an unpeated Speyside Scotch cask, and the other is actually the Woodford Reserve Double Oak barrel, which is it's their Woodford Reserve is basically finishing their bourbon in a heavily toasted barrel for about 6 to 9 months, and so I got some of those barrels, and that's what that is.
Gotcha. How much time is it spending in those barrels as opposed to in the original ex-bourbon?
So in that case, so with 12-year-old rum, and then for this batch, those finishes were just over a year. So I think around 13 months. Okay, so what is Grander? And this is oh, sorry about that. A very obvious question, but I always start with the ingredients. So Grander is made simply from sugarcane molasses. We have proprietary yeast, water, and then of course I like to add in the barrels that we use. And some of the barrels are sherry seasoned depending on the product. But I add the barrels in there because they do have a profound influence on the makeup of the product in terms of taste, aroma, and color. So for me, it is an ingredient that needs to be called out. And especially since we're using barrels that previously held spirits, when we get an empty bourbon barrel or rye whiskey barrel, whatever, everyone understands that there is still juice locked in that wood. That wood is not always, unless the barrel has been sitting there for years, then you wouldn't want to use it anyways. But if you get a barrel from a distillery and bring it down and fill it up with rum, that rum is going to at some point integrate and seep into that wood and touch with the other spirit that's locked up in there. So as subtle as it ever may be, it will certainly influence it. In terms of additives, except for adding water to proof it down, that's all we add to it is what you see listed in the ingredients. Regarding age, we don't do a Solera style. I don't have anything against Solera. It's just that's not what I do. And so the age statement represents the youngest rum in that bottle. I do bottle mine. I used to say higher. I don't know if it's if 90 proof and above is still considered high, but I guess 8 years ago when I started this for rum, I think it was considered high. 80 proof being pretty much the norm. And then of course we have the batch number as well that we put on our bottles. So as I demonstrated, so for our 8 and 12-year-old, my goal is to try to get 95% or better consistency. But honestly, it's without using anything to adjust it, it's really hard. And what makes it really hard for us is because we are using different barrels. We don't have the same barrel supplier. We're getting barrels from different producers. Obviously distilleries that had different tar levels and different mash bills. So it's very difficult for us to manage a consistent set when you have a lot of variation. So for me, the idea, every time I bottle in the 8 and 12 year, I always approve the batch. And I do, it's 50-50 if I have to go back and we have to make adjustments to that batch. So the idea is to try to get 95% or better, but we will see different, very small variations. Now you might not know from one bottle to the next. If you put them side by side, you might be able to pick up the variation. I think it'd be a little bit more difficult if you just had one bottle one night and then a couple of nights later you tried a different one. I think the variations will be small enough to where it'd be challenging, but you might be able to pick it out.
I've got a whole bunch of questions as far as the fermentation and distillation and even aging.
Yeah.
But before we get too ahead of ourselves, there was a question about where did the name Grander come from? Let's take a step back before we get too deep in the weeds.
Well, that is a future slide, but we can go ahead and answer that if you like, or you can just how about let's just wait and we'll get to that.
Yeah, let's wait if you have that prepared.
Okay.
So my first question, because you mentioned the in-house cultivated yeast, is there just one type? How long is the fermentation? And does each batch get the same exact fermented wash going into it? Are all the cuts always the same? Is it all column still?
Yeah. So I'm going to get into that as well. So we'll move on.
Okay.
Because I think I'm going to answer the questions, and then if I don't, I promise you I'll answer what you have. Okay.
Well,
and so the last point for me, I call this a single origin rum. This is 100% Panamanian. It's produced, aged, bottled in Panama. So everything is done under one roof, and it doesn't leave Panama until it's been corked. And I think it's pretty important to call out that the things I'm going to talk about the production process obviously is really the backbone in the structure of Grander rum, which is really coming from this gentleman, Don Pancho. But then there's a lot of variations then I'm allowed to do things that necessarily he hasn't done in the past. So the spirit of Grander really is a reflection of both Don Pancho and myself, and which makes it, I think, very unique in its own sense. It's really just it's a reflection of the two of us. So this is a photo I took on a trip down to the distillery. This is one of the cane fields. This is during harvest. So fermentation. So you're actually looking at fermentation tanks right here at the distillery. So fermentation, I guess you could call it a fairly typical Spanish style molasses-based fermentation. Fairly quick. I mean, 24 to 72 hours. So I think it really depends on the conditions that really dictate, but that's usually on average how long fermentation will last. It's not open air fermentation. As you can see, it is closed. And this is, obviously the tanks are exposed, but that's our roof. So Mike, in terms of fermentation, what specifics do you have that I could try to answer?
I guess, what ABV does it come to, does it reach in fermentation, and is it a pretty consistent wash that goes into each batch?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it is. I would say yes, it is a fairly consistent wash that goes into each batch. In terms of the ABV, that's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head. I can't remember, but I can get that to you.
That's all I had on fermentation, unless anybody else has additional questions.
Okay. So this, unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the stills just sitting there. So this is actually very much of a close up. But if you could imagine that these are column stills, there's 4 independent column stills, and they're fairly big. They're not small by any nature, at least in my opinion. And they actually, the distillery is producing light to heavy distillates, which again is a fairly consistent Cuban-esque Spanish approach, where you're making heavy and light distillates, column distilled, that are then blended to create products. This is, coming off the still. You have, and I'm going to get into the, we'll get into barrel entry proof, which is typically around 75%. But before that, we'll go ahead and jump into the third tasting, if you're ready. This is part of the third tasting is our barrel theory. So this is really just, you could also call it finishes or even double maturation, depending on your definition. So this particular one is a a 12-year-old rum that we finished in ex rye whiskey barrel. So you're going to get the spicy elements of the rye that play with the subtle sweetness of the rum. The rye barrels we used came directly from Heaven Hill, and what you'll be tasting is batch 2002.R or -R, and so that finished for 13 months, and we bottled that at 100 proof. So it's it's going to have a little bit of a kick to it, but I think you'll for people who don't like rye, and it's not an extreme rye. And what I mean by that is Heaven Hill makes, I guess, barely legal ryes, meaning they're probably just over 50% rye whiskey versus 100%. So very different. Might be more bourbon-esque, but still very much a rye. And I think you'll pick up some of the spicy notes that you would get from a Heaven Hill rye in this as well.
And just to be clear for everyone who has samples, because there are two different ryes, this is not the single barrel, this is just the standard one at 50%.
Yeah. All right, excuse me. Okay, so going after distillation. So as I noted before, all of our rums are aged in ex-bourbon barrels. Typical ABV, barrel entry proof or barrel entry ABV is 75%. I say typical because the distillery sometimes will do a little higher, sometimes they do a little lower. And I've seen that typically come out based on barrels that I'm sampling and whatnot. So, but I would say on average, 75% is the where we're typically at. There is no rick house, so to speak, that you would, if you've ever been to a Kentucky bourbon distillery, you're not going to see a rick house there. Everything is palletized, and the barrels age sitting upright, just as you see in this picture. Our climate is obviously Panama. It's tropical, so the temperatures range. I mean, your lows may get 78 overnight, and then in the highs, low 90s. So year round, you're between those two spectrums, and relatively high humidity. So the high humidity actually during our aging process typically causes us to lose alcohol, and so our ABV will drop over time in the barrel. You can see the evaporation rates. Oh, go ahead.
Are these barrels topped off or combined at all? Like, why is there variation each year in the evaporation? Is that because of the amount of liquid in the barrels?
Yeah. So there could be cask consolidation that happens. Yes, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
But I just want to be clear on the cask consolidation. We're doing it with the same ages, so we're not mixing different ages with it. So and so typically, they firmly believe that cask consolidation really does help combat evaporation throughout the life of the rum. And so I can't get into the scientific properties of why that is. So if you're going to ask that, unfortunately, I'm not the best person to answer that question. But typically, as a result, and what I can say in my finishing process, I fill the rum up, and then I'll see in the first year I will get easily 10 to 12% loss just in my one barrel that I finish in year one. And then in year two, sometimes I've had finishes go 2 years, and that's 8%. Then is pretty consistent. I haven't done finishes really thereafter, so the 3 to 4% are really my distillery numbers at that point. And what else can I answer about aging?
I think that covers what I had.
Okay. Picture of a glass of rum in Casco Viejo, so very old town, really picturesque. A nice place to drink rum if you're ever there. The 8-year-old, which I didn't bring tonight up. Usually I do, but this time I did not. So this is the 8-year-old, and actually, if you went out and bought a bottle of the 8-year-old today, the bottle we have out now is much lighter in color. So what when I sat down with Don Pancho at the beginning, we talked about product consistency, and he always told me that based on what I wanted to do, no additives. We're really beholden to the barrel at that stage, and so when we're blending, so if you can imagine, when we bottle the 8 or 12-year-old, particularly the 8-year-old. So typically the 8-year-old, I'm going after barrels we've used 2 to 3 times, whereas the 12-year-old, I'm going after barrels we've used 4 or 5 times. So those two differences. So the 12-year-old typically is going to be darker than the 8-year-old is going to be darker than the 12-year-old because of the 2 to 3 times, and you're going to get a little bit more oak influence. But Don Pancho was very clear to me when we sat down that, because in terms of achieving a consistent taste profile, he feels he can get there again 95% or better every time, no problem. But color, since I'm not going to allow them to use any coloring or anything, he said, that I can't control. So it could be lighter or darker the next batch. So that's the nuances of the approach that we're taking, given our production process and the barrels we use, and the versatility of the diversity of the barrels. So that's why we can have these differences in color extremes.
I just have one more question about the aging. You mentioned they go in around 75% into the barrels. What do they typically come out at? Is there much fluctuation is there over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's on average from what I've seen, I've seen probably mid 60s, going in at 75%. I would say mid 60s. That is what I've seen them come out as.
Mm-hmm. Have you done any releases at full strength?
I have done some single barrels, but I also have done a lot of 8-year-old single barrels at like 49%, and so you're probably going, well, hold on here. That's a big variation. So of course you can expect variations in the ABV just based on where it sits in the warehouse, how it ages, et cetera. So that's one thing, but that won't really answer the big swing. When we get the barrels that are at 49%, actually, when I talked about that, the distillery, I said on average does 75% barrel entry proof on average, but they have also done barrel entry proofs much lower as well. And so I have done some 8-year-old single barrels that we bottle our single barrels uncut. And so I've had some come in around 49%, and those were barrel entry proofs, very low extremes. So typically we're getting down to maybe around like 120 proof in that case. Not always. That's, but they will do some stuff. So I do try to find those because those really become pretty unique, and I do have clients that really like those. But then I have the clients that really go after, stuff that's more in the 50s. Typically, I've been trying to find barrels between low 50s to high 50s at this point for the 8-year-old. That seems to be a sweet spot, I think, for where. But yeah, no, I've done. I mean, you talked about the rum group, the rum caucus out of Alabama. They had one that was, I think, like 128 proof at one point.
Michael's asking a question. You kind of went over this a little bit, but is the barrel influence more evident on the 8-year, being that it's only a second or third fill rather than a fourth or fifth? Are you getting more of those? Besides the color, is it bringing out more of the barrel spices and those notes?
Yeah. No, compared to the 12-year, yes. Yeah, it is. I think, it's not going to be as extreme as if it was the first use of a barrel, but relative comparison to 12-year, yeah, you definitely would pick up more of the barrel notes. It's still obviously rum forward, so it's not going to be extreme barrel notes, but again, in comparison, yeah, you will.
Thank you.
So speaking of which, here's an 8-year-old single barrel that we did. That was no, so a couple of things about the 8-year-old single barrels. One, they're starkly different from the regular 8-year-old. And so let me answer or how or why they're starkly different for several reasons. One, I don't limit myself to second to third use barrels. So we can have barrels first time, we can have barrels used more. So I don't put that limitation on single barrel selections. So we could pick barrels that have, again, they've been used many times or very few times. So you get variations there. And then also some of the 8-year-old barrels, single barrels that we would offer also previously held sherry, which I've mentioned before, but I haven't really talked about. So, and I'm not saying they're sherry barrels. So it's actually a process to, it's similar to, for those familiar with Balvenie Scotch, I'm going to, and I only call them out because obviously Balvenie's been around a long time, but they have a product called, I think, Caribbean cask. So they're basically finishing their Scotch in a Caribbean or a cask that previously held rum, as they called it. So basically what they're doing is a similar process. They take empty Scotch barrels and they fill them with rum, and they let the barrel get seasoned, absorb the rum, and then they dump them. So they empty out that barrel, but keep in mind that there's some rum that's been locked up in that wood. So even though the barrel is empty, it still retains some of the characteristics. And then they'll fill it up with Scotch, and that's the product. So sometimes we employ a very similar process. It's different, but it's with PX sherry, where we're putting it into the empty barrel, and we do some seasoning, let it sit and age, not age really, but just season the barrel, and then we'll dump it. And so at that point, then we fill up with rum. So it's an empty barrel, but of course it's been, as you can think, seasoned with sherry. So we do offer some 8-year-old single barrels that previously held sherry, and we offer 8-year-old single barrels that did not previously hold sherry. So again, we're just giving options and letting people know. So we have some people that want a little bit of a sherry kick to their single barrel selection, and we have some that don't want it. And so we can we can be offering two types depending on usually the buyer and what they want and what their customers want, and that's and for us that's good. So the 8-year-old single barrels, we bottle those uncut and unfiltered. So unfiltered, we actually are doing a very light filtration, but it's a filtration not in the traditional sense of spirits. It's a filtration to block any um, uh, barrel particles, chunks of wood. But it's not unusual to come across a single barrel offering of Grander and actually see sediment sitting at the bottom of the actual bottle, and it's perfectly fine. But it's just that's coming from the barrel itself, and it's nothing else. Um, the reason we do that is I think it's for me it's very special when I'm down in Panama and I get to taste directly from a barrel. For me, it's there's nothing like it. So if I can bottle a product that is as close as an experience to that, and give it to someone who picks up a bottle, to me that's a great adventure to go on, and it's a nice thing to be able to experience as well. So
I
if
guess,
down
is
the
that
road,
something for those, I guess, or even for me to have a better understanding? So with chill filtration, which you don't do, that basically brings all the sediment and everything to the top and you skim that off, right? So
yeah.
what is the process that you do of basically taking out the majority of the char and the sediment and stuff?
I mean, we're out of the barrel. Basically, it is a it is. I wish I had something I could show you. I'm kind of looking around. I don't know why, but it's almost it's it is a screen, but it's got holes in it that are, you know, if you could see like this hole. I mean, not as big as that, but just slightly smaller. So we're catching anything that's bigger than that hole. So you know, we're making sure that the wood particles, we don't want to get wood particles into the bottle. But if there's any sediment from the rum itself that gets in there, we're going to let that happen. And does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Okay. Um, so, but our 8 and 12 year, we do a non-chill filtration of those. But the other products we do not.
So before we get into the barrel series here,
Yeah.
so your 8 and your 12 are your kind of standard continuous releases. Do you have any plans to do anything younger? Like I know Don Plancho a few years back was behind the Cagna Brava, which no longer is on the
Yeah.
shelves. Like, have you considered doing a lightly aged, daiquiri mixing run?
I have, and I've had people ask, but I haven't done anything yet. Not to say I won't, but I right now I don't have anything in the pipeline to bring onto that. So it's certainly not off the table. It's just not on the table right now as well. But who knows? But right now, yeah, the 8 is the youngest. So the 8 and 12 and the trophy are really the core items at this stage. Okay, so okay, so we'll get into the barrel series, and which again is about the finishes. But I would suggest if you're ready to go ahead and taste the last sample, which is, as Mike had indicated, is the rye, but it's a single barrel, and this barrel is, Mike. Do you still have the bottle that I sent you?
Here. Single barrel WRR09, 53.5%.
Okay, okay, and what's the age statement on it?
It says age 12 years.
Okay, thank you. So that is a 12-year-old rum that finished less than a year. I'm going to guess probably around 11 months. And it is finished in a Woodford rye barrel. So it is, to me, very different. Now, so we filled the barrel up at 55% ABV. So in 11 months, in this case, we knocked over a percentage point off the ABV, just strictly from aging. And but as you try it, I think that it's very different from the previous rye that you had. To me, the Heaven Hill rye is a little bit spicier, whereas this one is not, in my opinion. You may have different opinions, and I'd like to hear them, what people think about it. But to me, at least, I feel they're very different.
Very different.
So, so yeah, I mean, the barrel series again is about finishing. We every year I'm buying barrels and I'm sending these down to Panama. So we do all of our finishing in Panama. The barrels are coming from wherever I source them, but currently barrels that we're bringing to market, we have the more toasted oak, which is the Woodford Reserve barrels, and I actually brought those back because they were very popular. And I'm doing something called American Malt, which again also is a Woodford Reserve, but it's their malt whiskey spin. And then I do another one called the Oaks, which is actually a Russell's Reserve 10-year-old wild turkey barrel. And then also we have some rum sitting in some red tawny port barrels as well. So I may probably batch a few of those casks together and do a limited release across the broad market. And then you can see what we've done previously, again, other barrel bourbon types, Scotch types. We did some peated Scotch, which was people either loved or hated. It's a very, I don't know if any of you like peated. Yeah, divisive, exactly. If you like peated Scotch, you would love it. If not, you will absolutely hate this.
I'm curious from a cost standpoint, because I assume most rum distilleries are just using, Jack Daniel's barrels or whatever. So, I mean, if you're specifically pulling Blanton's and Weller and even, Russell's 10-year, what is the cost difference for a barrel, like on your end? How does it translate into the bottle cost to us?
Yeah, I mean, it's good question. So the one thing I learned is the barrel market is very finicky. It's very, I guess, like many markets, supply and demand driven, but it's like oil. I mean, it will change monthly, depending on or daily, really, depending on the demand. So right now, the barrel market is just insane. So the demand on barrels is so high that that's driving up cost. But buying a used barrel is cheaper than buying a new one. But then, as you said, there's different types of barrels. You can buy more niche barrels, which I'm doing, which become a little bit more expensive than if you were buying from from a Jack Daniel's. But then on top of that, I'm not a big buyer as well. So when I buy barrels, a lot of these distilleries are selling barrels by the container full. And when I buy barrels, I'm buying maybe 5 to 10 barrels a pop of, a different type. So, so that puts me at a little bit of a disadvantage as well. And then, of course, I have to ship the barrel down to Panama. So, that's added expense. So, yeah, I mean, it certainly does add to, I mean, it is more expensive to finish. I mean, there's an argument to be said that it could be cheaper to buy this rum in bulk and ship it over to the US and just do it all in the US. But I would argue that there's something special about finishing your product down in Panama in that climate from where the rum was born. So for me, providing that consistent element of the climate, the conditions that surround Grander far outweigh. So while it is more expensive, I think what it offers at the end of the day is well worth it. And and I think people who've had them, have told me that they enjoy the product and for what it is. So for right now, I'll continue doing it unless if the barrel market goes absolutely haywire, which it has a little bit, but I think it's still manageable. Then I'm going to continue doing or following the path that I'm following.
So, I mean, being that you're from Kentucky and most of the barrels you're using for finishing are whiskey or Scotch, still whiskey. You do have a port, but you have plans to use cognac or other sweet wines or anything else that's in the pipe?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So actually, I do. I'm getting ready to fill up a couple of cask cognac cask, and I'm actually what I failed to put on here. I'm actually getting ready to. I have a very, I guess, hyper limited release I'm coming out with in the fall. That is a blend of two casks from Napa, California, and one it's from the same winery, but one is was used to make Angelica port, and the other one was used to make a Madeira. So so my product is called it's Grander rum, obviously, but it's called Angel Made, so short for Angelica port and for Madeira. So so yeah, no, I'm using and actually I'm looking at picking up some more wine cognac based barrels, fortified sweet wines from France as well. So yeah, I will continue using stuff from bourbons, Kentucky distilleries, because as you pointed out, I'm from Kentucky and I like bourbon, so I will continue doing that. But I also love what the port cognacs, the Madeiras are bringing to the table as well. So I'm going to continue to expand those because those are absolutely delicious. I'm experimenting with some brand new barrels that have not been used before as well. So I'm definitely looking to experiment, try different barrels. There's different brandies, vermouths I've looked at. So, there's a lot of options out there, and it's just trying to figure out. I mean, I'm a one guy show, so I don't have my pockets are limited like everyone's. So I have to really kind of be selective on what I want to try out, knowing that I could buy some barrels that are really expensive and put the rum in there, and a year later it could taste absolutely atrocious. And so that would be the worst case scenario.
Right. So, I mean, I imagine at this point, like you said, you're a one-man show, and right now you're experimenting with potentially different barrel types. Have you thought about looking at other regions, other countries, other styles to release, or are you strictly staying with Panama for the foreseeable future?
So that's a great question. So right now, yeah, I mean, I am sticking with Panama the foreseeable future, but I don't rule out playing with other stuff. I think if some unique interesting opportunities really present themselves to me, then I definitely will take a look at. So I've had some stuff presented to me in the past from different countries that looked interesting, but this didn't make sense for Grander and what I'm trying to do. I am looking at some stuff now that may or may not work. So yeah, I mean, so Panama is really my focus, and that's really where I want to continue to evolve and develop the brand. And I think I still have a long runway. There's a lot of stuff I could still do that I've just tapped into. Going back to your point about, do I want to do something younger or not? There's there are different options I have out there with Panama, but also, there might be some intriguing stuff. So the fact that I am independent allows me or affords me the opportunity to be flexible. I don't, I can do some dingy stuff if I want, and not have to worry about it. So we'll see, I guess, what the future brings. And the question that was asked at the beginning, of course, I saved it towards the end. So actually, Grander is a moniker for a marlin weighing 1,000+ pounds. So the reason I chose it for me is the rarity, how beautiful, and it's a solitary creature. So you can read the the fun stuff on it, but really it comes down to a Grander or a marlin is, for me, a very beautiful fish. It's one of the most beautiful fish, for me, in the ocean. They're absolutely stunning to see. And no, I have not caught one, but they are swimming around Panama, so it is a goal of mine to do so. But what I like about Granders or marlin as well is you typically only find them in warm tropical climates or waters. So, which of course, rum is or at least sugarcane really spawns from a similar climate. I mean, you can make rum anywhere, but the that base ingredient has to come from those warm tropical climates. And the other thing as well is marlin. They are they don't swim in schools. I mean, they're independent, and that's exactly what I am. I am independent. I'm doing this by myself. I mean, obviously I have distributors out there that I hire, and if anybody is in an industry, that sometimes that's a good thing or a bad thing depending on your distributor. But being independent allows me to be flexible, to really forge my own path. And so for me, trying to bottle something that's beautiful and really speaks to me, tying it with something called Grander, really made sense and really resonated to me as a good name for the brand. And that's why I chose Grander as the name.
How many states are you currently distributed in?
So I think 11 at this stage. Yeah, I think it's 11.
Are you solidified with Greenlight right now, or is that transition still
We
happening?
are we are 90% there, or 95% there. We're just trying to finalize a few things. So yeah, hopefully it'll be 100%. But yeah, we're not quite there, but we're very close.
Okay. So for those in Texas, once this distribution move happens, hopefully we'll see more products show up on our shelves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So a few photos I took while in Panama. But so any other questions that I can answer for anyone? And
I've got several still unaddressed. I did notice on the single barrel rye, this was a 700 ml bottle as opposed to the 750s of the others. Are you looking to expand into other markets, or what is the reasoning for the different bottle size?
Two reasons why you're looking at that bottle. The first reason is the 700 exists because I do a small amount of business over in Europe. So, which I have to have a 700 ml. And the second reason why you're looking at that bottle is because of COVID. So I ran out of bottles, 750s, but I had 700s in Panama, and shipping. I mean, the cost and everything and backlog was through the roof. So it was either don't bottle or bottle in 700s. And so what I was able to do is everything was able to be bottled in 750s, with the exception of the single barrels, and I bottled all those in 700s. So now I'm back to 750s. However, down the road though, I may end up going strictly to 700. And if I do, it's because, again, being a small guy, it's really challenging trying to have 700s and 750s for two markets in place. It's really very costly to do that. So it would be great just having one bottle. But of course, then I want to manage, I don't want people in the US feel like they're being ripped off because they're 50 ml short, which isn't a significant amount, but it's still short. So, I would obviously then address my pricing to reflect, I want to be fair. But so, you could see down in a couple of years, I could possibly go to 700, but no decision made. But yeah, good catch. I'm glad you saw that.
Like I caught it because when I was distributing the samples, I almost oversold it, and I didn't have enough for myself. I was like, oh shit, because I had 2 ounces less in that bottle, and I only got an ounce for myself. I was hoping for a couple more.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, my bad. Yeah, you probably factored in 750. I can do this many samples, and
Exactly.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's all good. There was a question earlier. Is there any thought into doing a cane juice fermentation, like as opposed to molasses from the distillery, from Las Cabras, or from
like a just direct cane juice?
Sure, cane juice, yeah, as opposed to molasses.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. So I'm kind of intrigued by that and interested in that. So there may be some stuff I'll be doing down the road. There's nothing in place yet, but I'm very much open to doing and possibly exploring stuff like that. For
But
sure.
The distillery itself is not currently experimenting with that.
The distillery itself do not currently do that. So if I do something, it would have to be done elsewhere, which still very well could be in Panama.
Gotcha. A couple questions about Don Pancho. Is he exclusively working with Las Cabras, or does he work with all the distilleries in Panama?
He he works just strictly with Las Cabras, to my knowledge, and he. I mean, he's. I'm sure he's friendly with everyone, and he probably will lend his thoughts and perspectives. But I think now he's kind of slowed down his work schedule. He still goes to the office every day, but I think he's going. He's just working on his favorite stuff, if that makes sense, and he's enjoying his time, which is well deserved.
Is it safe to assume that most independent bottlings on the market and private labels are coming out of this distillery, or are the other distilleries also selling bulk?
I think so. I wouldn't make that assumption. I know that you'll see some independent bottlings, particularly over in Europe, single barrels Panama, and some will be from this distillery, and I think some will be from Ron Abuelo distillery. I think primarily just those two. I think the other ones, to my knowledge, are not really doing anything bulk wise or selling off. And then, but of course, the big Amsterdam company, Ian Shear, they have their hooks into every distillery, it seems like. So so that, they're probably the only exception. They probably have everyone. They seem to be getting raw distillate from, any distillery that you could mention.
Right. Gotcha. Steve's asking how many bottles typically come out of a barrel. Imagine in the 250 range.
We get, let's see here. I'm trying to, I know, yeah, I've got to pull out my calculator. Let's see here. No, I would say between 200 to 225.
Got it.
We've had some, I mean, the finishes are typically going to be around 225 just because, they're finished, but then the 8-year-olds are going to be usually less than that.
Gotcha. And Marshall's asking who sources from the Panama distilleries you work with? Are you at liberty to say, or do you know what other things are on the market from the same distillery, just for comparative purposes?
Yeah, so Silveray rum, have you heard of them? Silveray?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Bruno Mars.
Yep, Bruno Mars, his flavored stuff. Wakata Brava did as well. What else is on the market that I'm sure there's others that I'm just, of course, Origins, which is Don Poncho's brand, but that's his.
I Googled that after you mentioned it. I've not seen Origins here in our market, but
okay,
we do have the Don Poncho branded items, which I assume there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I'm missing an obvious one, but I can't for the life of me think. But yeah, no, it's it's not. And then I'm sure, there's
Panama Pacific.
Yeah, that's it. Yep, thank you.
All right, so Marshall's holding it up right there. Cool. Well, I mean, that's all the questions I got. So if anybody else wants to unmute and go ahead and shoot them at Dan, feel free to.
Yeah.
And just also want to say real quick, thank you for your time tonight. I know you're under the weather, so I appreciate you.
Yeah, but apologize.
I
did my coughing and I feel fine. It's just still slightly congested.
All right. Well, I guess I did have one other question since nobody else is chiming in. From the beginning, you mentioned that you had tried a rum neat and that's what converted you. What was that rum? I don't think you specified.
Yeah, always get asked that question. So Pussers. Pussers rum. It was probably 15 years ago.
Curious, what would that have been, like a standard proof one, or would that have been more of a Navy strength?
It probably was the standard proof one.
Because I know their products have changed over time. Right now, they're sourcing everything from Guyana, where it used to be Guyana, Barbados, and I believe Trinidad. So it's changed over time. It was a blend of multi-islands or multi-regions, and now it's all coming out of GDL.
Okay. So I haven't had it recently. How has it changed, in your opinion?
Honestly, I don't use Pussers very much. I haven't tasted it in a long time, so I can't really recall.
Yeah.
They do have the gunpowder proof now, which is something they had when the brand first launched in like 1980. Was their standard release was the 4.5, Navy strength. Yeah. And so now that's their gunpowder proof, but their regular, the blue label is, I believe, 40%, and that's the one that you most often see.
Yeah. 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 So, I guess 15 years ago, that was kind of my introduction to, wow, okay, this is very different than what I, expected.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to go back and try it. It's been a long time. I'll have to pick up a bottle and try it. and see
Yeah, it's
how
worth
my
revisiting.
memories are. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
for
It'd be
sure.
fun. It'd be fun to
Cool.
relive to see if it drums up the same memories
Yeah.
or not.
More comments going in the chat. Feel free, y'all, if you want to unmute, if you want to speak out loud, you're able to.
I got a question for you. You mentioned, I think, that you started Grander about 8 years ago. I think maybe I caught that.
Yeah.
Is this still kind of a side hustle for you, or is this now sort of big enough that you've been able to take this on as like your kind of full-time thing?
Yeah, it's my full-time thing.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. It's been quite a journey. I mean, I still have a long way to go, but yeah, it's my full-time gig. And it's so I'm juggling a lot of balls. I'm focused, I'm dealing with obviously marketing aspects, and then dry goods and production and scheduling, and it's I mean, everything you can imagine.
Yeah.
Barrel select, trying to find barrels I can ship down there, and making sure I have enough glass to bottle with, and dealing with the label manufacturer, and finding the right rums for the next blend.
Yeah, it's
So,
a whole thing. So how long did it take you to get there? And what did you do prior to becoming an independent rum bottler?
so so what I did before, actually, I worked in the technology side of the house of financial companies.
Mhm.
And so I did that for many, many, many years. And but always had really a desire to do this. Just not exactly sure what this was. I knew it was going to be in spirits, but just not quite sure exactly based on my story what path I went down. So, but but yeah, I mean, it still took a few years to get to where I wanted to be, and I still you know I guess for anybody who starts their own business, I mean, I'm not sure if you ever feel complete or if you're ever done. I mean, you just
Yeah.
you're just you keep going. There's just so much more for me to do, and I feel like I've really just scratched. Even though I've been around 8 years, but also I'm just in 11 states. I mean, I've been primarily just in a handful of states for that most of that time, and arguably I still have a lot more growth in those existing states. Um, but I still have the majority of the U.S. that I haven't even touched. So there's still a lot of opportunity and growth aspects, and I think premium rum. I think the U.S. is starting. In the last couple of years, I think people in the U.S. have really begun to appreciate and understand more about premium rum, or just rum in general, and the diversity of rum. So I think we're really in a good trajectory as a rum community to see a lot more good things to come out.
Yeah, I
So I
agree
think
with
it's an
that.
exciting time.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's an interesting story, and I'm a Kentucky native myself, so
Oh,
I feel
great.
like we have sort of a similar story of sort of coming from that bourbon world, and then tasting some rum for the first time, and
Yeah.
thinking, oh, this actually tastes like it's from somewhere,
Yeah.
versus it all sort of kind of running together. So
Yeah.
it's a cool story.
No,
Congrats.
I agree. Thanks.
Well, I would say, the profile, because like Latin or Central and South American rum is something that for the most part I've avoided, because most of what's on the market is sweetened, it's low ABV, it's column distillate, it doesn't pack a lot of flavor. And so that's what makes your brand so unique and unusual, is because you're doing the higher proof, you're not doing any additives, you're doing it with minimal filtration. What would you say is your target market the bourbon market, or is it just rum, people drinking rum neat, or where do you think you land in the spectrum?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think that I'm really looking to am I targeting the bourbon market? I mean, am I specifically targeting market? No, I'm not. But I think it's also, I do understand that this Grandeur is really a reflection of myself. And I did come from a bourbon background. I mean, I still like bourbon today. So, I think my taste profile, I think as you taste my rums and you see them, you can see some similar, nuances going on there between the bourbon world and maybe my world. I mean, obviously with the oak influence, particularly with my single barrels and my finishes that I'm doing. So I mean, was my intention to go after the bourbon market? No, but I think just because of how the product has evolved and it's really a reflection of me, I think it does appeal and can easily appeal to, folks who do like bourbon and want to get into rum. But also, there is, you're right. Typically column distilled rums are not going to be the in your face rums, or the ones that are packing the punch, so I do bottle mine typically at a higher ABV again, and that's coming from my background. I don't mind having a little warmth and a little tingly notion and a little bit of a bite going down. That doesn't scare me. I actually welcome it. So I want my rum to appeal to those that really want something they first and foremost, they could enjoy neat if they want and just sip and it's it's a very warming, enjoyable dram of something to have in your glass. But also, to make a cocktail as well. So, you can have fun with it and make a lot of different types of cocktails with it. You can make whiskey-based cocktails if you want, but also you can do some traditional rum cocktails as well. So, I think, I don't know if it's probably a horrible marketing answer to say, because, I'm going after this demographic and this is exactly what, but I'm not actually trying to nail it down there. I am trying to make it more appealing to a wider group, I will say. And I think, the rum is more appealing. It's not going to be your in your face type of rum. So I think it's only one that people enjoy. It's a very easy one to enjoy, and it's going to be something that's warming to have next to your side.
Who are your biggest customers? You're typically going after distributors to get into the, consumers like me, or are you going through restaurant groups, or how does that? I'm not familiar with that side of the business. I'd be curious to hear.
Yeah, I mean, so I typically will. So I do a lot of business with groups, bourbon groups and rum groups. So So going to the the U.S. laws of alcohol, me as a supplier or even as a producer, I have to sell to a distributor in every state. So every state that I open up, I have to sign up a brand new distributor. And so in theory, I'm selling to the distributor who then sells to the retailer or to the bar or whatnot. But typically I try to engage, like we're doing tonight, with groups to introduce my brand, to do samplings, and then I'll work with again, I'm with bourbon clubs and rum groups, and we'll do stuff. I do a lot of business with independent stores usually as well. I don't, if you look at my overall model, I don't do a ton of business with chains, at least not yet, because being a small brand and, with limited pockets, I have to be very, I guess, tactical at how I approach this. So
Sure.
For me, it's much easier to create a relationship with an independent store that really works hard in curating their store and has a relationship with their customers. So I know if I can get some good bottles in there of Grandeur, that they'll take the time to educate their customer on, hey, I have this new product, this is what it is, here, you can taste it, whatnot. That does a lot for me to help grow my business and educate people. Again, since I don't have the deep pockets to have the big billboards. I do have, social media, which, I have a lot of opportunity to improve upon that as well. So, there's different takes you can, or different paths you can take. I think if you're someone like me going into this business, and right now that's the path, I've taken.
Jeff from Memphis is on the call, and he mentioned trying to work with a retailer to bring a barrel pick, and that's something I'm currently trying to do with you as well. And it's funny because I think we have a pretty solid foundation here in Austin. We have a good club. We have routine calls with people like you, and it's hard for us to get barrel picks just because we don't have the buying power of some of the larger markets. Even DFW and Houston have a lot more population and buying power than Austin does. So how does your barrel program work essentially? How do are you working with the clubs directly and saying, hey, as long as you get your distributor to commit to this, or like how? Because I've pitched this to a couple shops, people are on board. Yeah, we'll take 10 cases, but we have to basically sell the whole barrel for the distributor to take it, sell it to the retailer, sell it to us. So it's like John was saying.
Yeah.
So it's a multi-tiered system. It's 3 to 4 tiers.
Yeah, it is. Well, yeah, and So what I found is different groups do different things, and I think it just depends on, like you said, where the group is, how big they are, et cetera. I mean, I've had and in the stores as well. So I know for the like I'm trying to give an example. I know the there's a group in Alabama. They do picks, and they do a lot of they have a relationship with a retailer, and so basically the retailer always takes on a certain amount, but the Alabama group, they always pre-sell the other amount. So they have a working model though they've been doing for a while. So it's just kind of easy for them. And then I've had other groups that it's a relationship where they have it with the store, but then the store really carries the bulk of it as well in their inventory. But the group goes in there and they support it, but then the store still has the burden as well. So I mean, there is no one size fits all. I've seen it happen differently. But in terms of what I've done also, I have depending on the market, I have done split barrel picks as well. So for a group that's really interested. But I mean, I've been in some markets where the retailer is like, hey, we don't have a lot of rum buyers in this particular market, but we really love your rum. We'd like to have it. Can we split a barrel with someone? And so I've done that. So there are options to try to overcome some of the obstacles that we all face. Because rum is still, even though there are a lot of people out there that love rum and enjoy rum, it's not bourbon, it's not tequila. So for a retailer to go and buy a barrel of those, they know, hey, I'm going to sell it within X weeks or X months. Rum, it could be a little longer.
Yeah.
It could be. It depends on the market. I had when I first started selling single barrels. I'll give you this story. I sold 2 barrels in Illinois. This is probably 6 years ago. One buyer was a small independent retailer in Peoria, Illinois, which for those who don't know Peoria, Illinois, it's in the middle of Illinois and it's, cornfields. And then the other retailer was a small little retailer called Benny's, which is not small at all. They're out of Chicago. They are a massive chain, and they both bought barrels. Now get this, the Peoria store sold their barrel within 12 weeks. And they actually ended up with more cases than Benny's, like 10 more cases. Benny's took a year to sell their barrel. And that was in Chicago. So, I mean, it's really, it's
well,
just,
I think it boils down to education, right? Like if the shop knows how to sell it, if they know what the product is, if they know what their clientele is, because I work with a couple different shops here trying to bring barrel picks, and something like this can appeal to anyone that likes spirits. Period.
Yeah.
Like it's a great gateway to people that are bourbon lovers that don't know that they're going to love rum. They haven't had the right rum yet. So I think it just it's from the top down. Like who has the knowledge? If you can share it, you can sell it. I mean, the
Yeah.
product speaks for
And-
itself. It's a quality product. So as long as you have somebody that works there that knows how to sell it, it'll move. And Binny's
and
probably, they have so many stores, and how
Yeah.
qualified is everyone that works there.
No, well put. And you're right. And I think particularly with my barrel finishes, it typically is a bit more attractive for a retailer to buy a barrel, knowing that, hey, it was finished in, this type of bourbon barrel. So it's going to pick up some of those nuances that they can sell to, a bourbon, person that comes into their store. It's a little easier to sell than it would be if it was maybe starting off with a barrel of Jamaican funk, which you probably would love, Mike, but that might be a little harder to sell to, non-rum drinkers out of the gate.
Sure.
So, but the good news is, I remember even 4 years ago, I had retailers who loved my product who told me I just can't take it because I don't have anybody, who a year and a half ago reached out to me and said, I'm actually getting people asking for rums. So we actually would like to see barrels now. And so I had retailers reach out to me because of that, which is, to me, a great thing. It just shows that we are slowly moving in the right direction, and it's good. And I think that, it'll just open up, I think, more avenues for other good rum products to get into the States as well.
So do you want to focus, your 5-year plan, say, do you want to focus on bringing more awareness in the states you're already distributed in, or are you ready to start expanding?
So I, first and foremost, I want to continue building my awareness of the states I'm in. I still feel like I have a lot of pathway and runway to cover there. And then on top of that, then methodically and slowly, maybe add a state here and there over time, just depending. So, so kind of I wouldn't say a balanced approach, because I would say if you looked at the scales, I would still tilt my focus still where, the states I'm in, and then slowly open other ones, but when I open, I really want to make sure that I'm opening it right and providing the right focus there as well. If that makes sense. So I'm not going to open up, quickly, at least, at the path I'm taking right now, until I really continue to invest where I'm at as well.
Well, I will say that you had sent me a list of some potential barrel options for this coming spring, and I've got my eyes on that Russell's 10-year barrel. So I'm hoping we can make that happen here in Austin.
Well, good. Let's continue, talks about that, and see if we can make that happen. You said you what, out of curiosity, why that barrel?
That just seemed the most appealing to me personally, and when I pitched it to a couple people, that's the one they kind of had their eyes on of the options you provided.
Okay.
You have a whole bunch of stuff dealing with Scotch. Are you have any more plans with like Balvenie or some other Scotches coming up?
I don't right now. I do have. I actually do have 2 barrels of rum and peated Scotch, but that's peated.
That's
And oh yeah, but and these now have been in there for 2.5 years, so they're like, so yeah. If you love peat, and the the good or bad of it is because my rum is, it's peated Scotch can quickly overpower the rum.
Yes.
And so after 2.5 years, I mean, it's definitely still a rum, but
You got
the peat is
it's gonna
full.
be forefront.
Yeah, it's full in there, full front, and so I'm not sure what I'm doing with those. I've sold all the other barrels, but those two, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do with those. So yeah, so I am probably going to do something with those, but I may do a blend just to tame it.
Okay.
Because I think just bottling those straight now, maybe it may be, I don't know. I mean, who knows? You never know. Someone may go, hey, I've got to have it, but it's a
Yeah.
very niche, very niche.
I guess that-
it would be interesting to try.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that I was gonna have a follow-up, like, what happens when you put something in a different barrel and you don't like the results? I mean, I guess you blend it with something else until it's palatable and sellable, right? I mean, how do you combat?
Yes, I mean, that's exactly what you would do. Now, knock on wood, I have not had to actually do it yet. But these two peated barrels, and actually, I'll drink them. I'll enjoy them. I think they're actually still nice because like a rum purist, if they get it, they'll be like, no, because you've taken over it. But I think you have to take it for what it is. But I think the person going in has to understand what they're getting themselves into. So, but I may. But if I did, like in that example, Mike, if I did blend that, I would blend it so that you would still pick up the essence of the peat. I'm not trying to mask it or hide it because I still think it offers. There's a lot of positivity with it. I just may want to try to tame it.
Right.
So I wouldn't be blending it to hide it because to me it's still beautiful in its own right, but it just maybe needs to be tamed.
Sure. So, I mean, you had mentioned, you go to the distillery 4 times a year, you select the barrels that appeal to you. How do you know, like, what is your process of blending? If how many different barrels go into a blend? How do you know that this is gonna, what the final result is gonna be? What is your history and background of doing that to know that it's gonna come out the way you hope it will?
So, my history and background is I can't really speak of it because it's all probably what you've done, trial and error, and you probably have as much expertise, maybe more than me. I don't know, but so the 8 and 12 year actually Don Pancho and his team do the blending of that. But before it's bottled, they actually present it to me. I have to approve it. And typically I'm judging it against prior marks. And so, but so I'll set that aside. The trophy is really the product that I'm blending. After that, it's really the like the rye finish that you tried earlier, the 100 proof one. That's a blend, but that was a blend of 6 barrels of the same rum going into Heaven Hill rye barrels, and we blended those 6 barrels together. So I can't say there was really a lot of masterful, artful blending going into that because the barrels were all fairly similar. But the trophy is really where it becomes interesting. And so for me, first and foremost, I'm trying these rums individually, and so individually, it's I guess I've over 8 years I've tasted enough rums that I guess I have formed a bit of a palate now for it. And so I taste them individually, and I kind of in my own sense have an idea of, okay, this could work, this could be interesting, this could, I think these are complementary flavor profiles I'm getting out of the barrels that I think they're unique enough where they can bring their own personality to the table, but also they're not extreme to where they will combat with the other. And so for me, when I taste through, it's really being able to take the notes and understand how those nuances can play or not play together. And then when I do select them, I actually have holding tanks, and I'll say, okay, I want this rum. Go ahead and dump it into my my trophy holding tank, and we will slowly build it throughout a period of time. And then I'll say, okay, add this and add this, and then let it sit there, because I find that if you let it sit and just over time, it just, even though it's not getting air, so to speak, or it's not in a barrel, it's still melting and evolving together. I mean, the
Are those
molecules are,
stainless tanks?
no, these are the IBC, just the regular non-stainless tanks, but we're not sitting on them long either. So
Do you know, is it a matter of, you want to put, say, 6 barrels into this blend, or is it, let's keep messing with this until I'm happy with it? Like, how do you know when that release is ready?
I mean, typically I kind of, usually I'll try to have kind of an idea of the yield I'm looking for. But that's only it's a guideline. It's not going to be an exact rule, because at the end of the day, it's up to you. I mean, I've done blends where I think I'm ready, and then I'll taste it. I'm like, okay, I'm missing something. I've got to, it needs something a little bit different. And so if I have to continue to evolve it, I will. And then I've got, I have a lot of samples in my access. So I know I can pull them out and go, okay, I think actually this might be a good one to add to it. And then I'll do, my own mini blends back, at my place. And we'll do, I guess, my micro blends first and foremost with myself. And then we'll take that and extrapolate out into something bigger. And of course, that never turns out the way you think. So you have to go back and continue to tweak that. So it's a bit, yeah. I mean, it's fun. It's stressful, and it's fun in the same, same way. So it's a lot. It's a lot of excitement.
Cool. Well, we've been on the call for a couple hours now, and I know, like you said earlier, you're under the weather. If anybody has any more questions, get them out now, and let's call it a night. You good? All right. Well, thank you so much,
All
Dan,
right.
for joining us.
Yeah.
This was great. I appreciate
Hey.
all the knowledge and info.
No, my pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thanks for all the questions. All super questions, and I hope we get to do something with you guys as well. And hopefully I do get my deal in Texas, so we can maybe do a barrel pick, and then it takes me to Austin. And if we get there, maybe we can do an event
That'd be great.
or something. At least have a drink.
Yeah. Would love to meet up, do an in-person event if possible. So just keep in touch. And,
All right.
I'll keep everybody posted.
Okay, guys. Well, everyone, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Man.
Good night.
All right.
Feel better.
Cheers.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Made it complicated. So anyway, thank you, Dan, for joining us. Thank you, everybody else on the call.